what is a role of a product manager? What kind of things he does in his day-to-day life?
Multiplexing across multiple things, right? Building it, getting it validated, taking it out to the customer, getting the feedback, and then getting the iterations done. All the time, you have to be talking to a different set of people.
There are a lot of people, a lot of team, and a lot of cross-section. Various teams he has to go, various customers he has to meet. What are the skills to become a product manager?
As a product manager, when you start looking at it, you keep technology away.
How do you maintain innovation and creativity intact while you are communicating with various teams?
But if the frequency is high, then this is not the solution, because you don't have to do stuff that's going to go out as a next release. But you need to be aware that when the time comes, you are not starting then.
So what happens if the business or the stakeholders are not in with your ideas? How do you conduct as a product manager in market research? How do you get those insights to evolve your product? Thank you, Vijay, for joining in at this special episode. And this episode is all about how a software engineer can transition into a product manager. So before we begin, I wanted to understand you and your journey.
Thanks, Kamlesh. Thanks for having me here. I think it's been a wonderful few months of interacting with you. That started with CTO Talk, and now we are here, and I'm very happy to be a part of your podcast series. And the other aspect that I really enjoy is the topic that you just shared, right? It's about the journey of starting as a programmer and getting to product manager, which is typically what I pursued. I'm happy to share my experience. Hopefully it helps the viewers. And to begin with, my journey has been about 22 years so far in the IT industry. I started way back in 2001. I think I would say with a lot of pride that my career has been split into pretty symmetrical halves. The first 10, 11 years with corporates, in the last 10 years with startups and more aggressive ecosystems, right? So there's been a natural progression from having done the rigorous training, onboarding with these large companies, getting to become more seasoned in development. And then I think in 2013, when the cloud and mobility started, the mobility started a little earlier, but then with the cloud, the advent of cloud, and that starting to gain more traction, the last 10 years has seen me go back to a programmer again, right? But yeah, it's been a mix of experiences. So to be very specific, I think the first 10 years, I've had my hands dirty, working as a C++ engineer and financial as well as telecom domains. But once you start moving in the ranks of development, you typically get to a team lead, a product manager or a project manager and so on. So within a technology company, you always have an added advantage that when you get to those roles, your surface of interaction increases, right? You're no more confined to just working with yourself or just a set of technology related folks. You start talking to a broader cross section of people, from sales, pre-sales, sometimes even finance, because you might be helping them with bids. Definitely start talking to customers, product teams, and so on. So that was the tipping point for me, where I realized that in order to sell a product, in order to make a customer use a product, it goes beyond just being a technology person, right? You need to know a lot more. So the natural progression up to that level took me to this understanding that I need to be very clear about who's using the product, how they use it, why they use it, right? And not just understand how you're going to build that. So at a point when I was leading the R&D team for a telecom company, it is called Evolving Networks. It's in Bangalore. I started to fancy myself in a role which would give me more access to these off technology areas as well, so that you can get a 360 perspective of what to build. And I was lucky that at that point, the product that we were building was also fancied to be sold within Asia Pac. And there was an opening for a pre-sales opportunity, and then I grabbed that. So a person with the product knowledge, with a decent bit of communication, being able to understand the needs of pitching a product along with sales, that was a big turning point for me to try and go beyond just being a technology person. So I met customers, I met deployment teams, I met people right from legal to support. And it was very clear to me that this was a more exciting and more responsible role beyond having just built the product, right? So that is where my inclination to get into something which is as vast as product was there. Back then, unlike today's world, product management was not a very concrete layer, right? It was still a lot of project, it was a lot of customer interaction, pre-sales. I think it became a lot more prominent in the latter years with mobility, cloud, startups, like products as simple as some app on your phone, right? Started making that layer a lot more concrete. So naturally, for me, coming from a corporate background, having worked through all these departments, I fancied that this was an area where I could contribute more compared to just being a hands-on developer or leading a development team. So I started to look in that direction. So this was somewhere in 2011 and 2013. So 2013, I moved on to a startup that was working on mobile apps. At that time, it was not just like today where you just have Apple and Android, right? You had the Samsungs, you had the Blackberries. It was a vast burgeoning ecosystem of mobile apps at that point. So we had a lot of good OEM connects, and I started handling projects, importing applications, and understanding how mobile worked. That really got enhanced by the advent of the cloud adoption. And then when you had a mobility, web development, and cloud, naturally you're able to put a startup together, help a startup, put their product together. So then these traits of being able to work across a cross section of people and taking these mobile apps and products forward made me clearly focused on something which I felt was the need of the hour, that was product management. In the last 6 years, I've been closely working with a few startups that I've had the privilege to start from ground zero and build them up. So that has been my journey from being a technology person, and today I think the right way to put my contribution to a startup is as a person who works at the cross section of both engineering as well as product.
So, as an engineer or a software guy, I just want to understand what is a role of a product manager and what kind of things he does in his day-to-day life.
So product manager is one who is very adept at multiplexing across multiple things, right? I'll tell you what those are. But essentially, the trait of a product manager is to carry the vision of the product forward, which is building it, getting it validated, taking it out to the customer, observing what happens, getting the feedback, and then getting the iterations done, right? So this is a typical life cycle of a product. But in order to accomplish this, a product manager has to coordinate with several teams, right from users to designers to engineering teams to support teams, because a product is not just got the actual users, right? The internal users are support people. So when you look at it from this perspective, I would say that the product manager's work is to pull together all of these things in the right time and with the right set of inputs, outputs getting aligned towards your project plan, right? I would say that a product manager would start off with beginning with to set the clarity to the entire set of stakeholders that he works with, right? So that is where this user journey is very, very important. So he would be very, very specific about how the journey begins, what the experience of the user is. And once he's got the wind of that, of course, it's not that you get absolute clarity everywhere, but then once you get a sense of what he wants to do, then the journey of executing that begins. And then it's about working to build those requirements into wireframes, user journeys, to bring vision into what was there in your mind and the customer's mind. So then you start to work with designers, you start to work with people who can help you with the journeys. So it could be as simple as doing something in draw.io, a very low fidelity wireframe, or it could just be sketching some flow diagrams, swim lane diagrams. You have to bring that vision into what you're going to achieve, right? And then from there, you take it to your, if you work with engineering teams who are peers to you, you have to translate that, help them to put the sprints together. So then that part of the development work starts. So it's again iterative, as we know, right? It's going to go back and forth between design and how you're going to execute. While these things start snowballing, you have to start thinking about non-functional requirements, right? Okay, how is the performance going to look like? Right? How is it going to scale? Right? What is going to be the user groups that are going to test it? So it's a medley of things that you try to arrange in an order where you can, coordinate and execute the entire project. That's why the product manager's role is very exciting, because every day you'll have to stick your neck out and then get things done for somebody else. Firefight challenges, ensure that there is a coordination between teams. So it is a lot of management overheads that you need to take care. The other part of it is you also have to be a person who can, put hypothesis together, because if it's a first time product, it's great, right? You have this typical development cycles that will take you there. But think of a person who's already got a product out there, right? It's a constant need to drive business requirements. It could be profitability, it could be engagement, it could be stuff that you need to keep measuring for the users there. It could be user growth as well. So at that stage, the project manager has got added responsibilities, and he starts to add more hypothesis, adds to look into a lot of analytics that is already there in the app or the product, and start to build hypothesis around what's going wrong, how to get it right, and then the chain again continues. So the journey for a launched product adds a lot more responsibilities in these areas. So a product manager has to deal with this wide spectrum of responsibilities, right from inception of an idea, thinking of a hypothesis, all the way to implementing, getting it executed, looking at analytics, getting feedback into the system again. And at all the time, you have to be talking to a different set of people, whether it's the users, whether it's your developers, whether it's your analytics team, whether it's a support team. So when I talk about support, that's a key part of any product manager, because to me, a product's users are not just the external users, right? People who have to support the product are equally important. So if you build a product that's great for a user, but it's a nightmare to support, then you're pretty much not going to have a happy customer. So these are, teams, and these are phases of any product's life cycle that you have to deal with on a daily basis. As I said, based on where you are in the journey of a product, some of them may apply initially, some of them may come out later. But I just wanted to give this as a broad spectrum of areas and activities that you should be, expecting to deal with on a daily basis.
So I think that's like spot on with the role on what the product manager's day to day looks like and what the role is about. The next question I feel, which is very much related to what you have spoken already. Like you said, the product guy has to coordinate with a lot of people. There are a lot of people, a lot of team, and a lot of cross section around various teams. He has to go, various customers he has to meet, and so on. So, as a software engineer, what are the skills he should be equipped to become a product manager?
I would think of a few things which I would call as traits, right? I mean, skills, you will acquire them, but I think I want to take one step back and then see who would fit a typical profile, right? Just like what I found out for myself. The first thing is he has to be a person who, since you are talking specifically for a cohort of programmers or software engineers,
At least to begin with.
To begin with, right? So they are a cohort who are starting off with a very focused mindset on technology, right? So to them, my advice would be take a step back and start looking at it from maybe 10,000 feet, right? Because a product is beyond technology, and the way you realize that is you have a wider vision. When I say wider vision, what am I talking about? Now, for example, pick up an app on your phone, right? Open the app, use it. I mean, unconsciously, we are using apps throughout the day, right? But as a product manager, when you start looking at it, you keep technology away and then start looking at various other interactions. How does it help you do stuff, right? What are the areas that you would probably like it to do better? What are the things that amazed you, right? What were the magic moments it created? So those are, if you have an inclination to be interested in those things, then probably you have a sort of a trait in you where you're looking at experience, you're looking at the application, the interaction, right? Beyond just how did they do this? Did they use a WebSocket to automatically pop up a notification? That's technology. But if you have this interest in understanding this from a 10,000 feet view, looking at how fast it is, how great an experience it is. That's probably a trait in you that might help you to move forward in product management. Number two, as I've been talking about, product manager is not a one player game, right? It is a team effort. And most of the time, these are teams that don't report to you. You'll have to, work with teams. So if you're a collaborative person by nature, it really helps enhance the, effectiveness in being able to marshal these resources together and move the, product forward, right? So if you're gung-ho about talking to people, following up, setting up clarity for others to work with you, and you're able to bring everybody together on the same page, these are traits that really help you. So if you're that kind of a person, it's definitely going to make your life a lot more easier because you can organize things. And as I said, it's a wide array of aspects that you need to tackle when you're a product manager. And the last thing is, you have to be learning constantly. As I said, you are going to be not implementing every phase yourself, but you still need to know what's happening at every phase. You need to understand how design is being made, right? Is it as per the Android guidelines? Is it as per the iOS guidelines? So that level of knowledge in each of these areas will help you, stay on top of things. So you have to be a constant learner, right? So if you have this ability to take a much broader view of things, if you have the ability to collaborate, and if you have the inclination to learn each of these stages, that puts you in a very prosperous stage to embark on this. That's how I look at it. And then people can build skills on top of it, right? I mean, when I got into product management, I was quite curious about how analytics works. So today, you start creating, your learning curve starts there, right? But I don't have that much of a experience on the design side in terms of being very adept at Figma or something. But I can understand looking at a screen whether it is following the principles of a particular framework that's adopted for from a design perspective, like it's like a material design for Google, or whether it's following the navigation that is correct for iOS. So that's the basic sanity checks and hygiene stuff that you can validate yourself. So those skills will start building up because your role will demand that you are able to not just give requirements but also validate to a good extent that you're comfortable with delivering each of these phases, right? So I think the skills will be across all this entire paradigm of right from your user journey all the way to testing the app yourself, but you'll pick it up along the way. But more importantly, you should be a person who's ready to work and actually engage in work that cuts across this various departments together. That will really put you in a much more prosperous stage.
I think that's great. But I have one problem, like this is my personal problem.
Mm-hmm.
The personal problem is, I'm in tech sometimes. And the product is obviously a tech product. And then what happens is there is a problem or there is a situation. As a manager, I try to understand I get a gist of it, what's the problem. I do communicate to my team that did you check this, did you check that, and see if these things are fine and see if the problem is resolved or not. But then sometimes I feel that when team is not able to respond on that, or maybe they don't have they're not able to solve, sometimes I really get inclined into getting into the field and doing it. So what do you think about this?
Well, that's not wrong. So as I said, right, a product guy is.
No, because you said you have to take a step back and look at things. Yeah, that is great. But sometimes you get too involved. I feel that is also bad. But then I want to understand how to
That's
balance.
always a balance. Yeah, there's always a balance, and there's no right formula for it, right? My advice is this: if you have equipped yourself to a point where you can, get into the weeds and discuss with the developer, that's always going to help you, right? And I've had to do it many times. I come from a development background, so you can sort of at least give pointers in directions where they can debug stuff or relook at stuff or go for an alternative solution. That always helps, right? So as I said, it's your strength and where you want to apply it. You could also do it in design. So I think that's a big asset to have. Getting into the weeds is not a wrong thing, but that cannot be your day job, right? That probably points to other deficiencies in the organization where maybe you have a lack of bandwidth in somebody being able to play that role full time, that your product manager has to get involved. But that's a different set of challenges. Answering your question, I don't think it's a wrong thing to do. But if the frequency is high, then this is not the solution, because every time you spend, you might be excited, you might be successful in weeding out the problem and getting your team back on track. But that just means that you're not being able to do some other dimension of the product work, right? So it has to be done at the cost of something else. So look at how frequently you have to do it. If it's too frequent, then that's a different problem to solve. But once in a while, if you get into it, it also gives you that boost and stimulus to understand how things are going, and you can set things right back again. So as I said, it's up to your bandwidth
frequency
and
balance. I think that's great. The next thing I want to get into is, so basically a product manager is a leadership role, and how do you maintain innovation and creativity intact while you are communicating with various teams, and how are you keeping it aligned with business requirements and also with clients' requirements?
Yeah, it's a challenging aspect, right? Again, everybody wants to be creative, innovative, but when it comes to business, there is a lot of limitations, especially if you're in service business, in terms of how much you can allocate. So to me, it is two things. One, you have to do that to keep your team inspired, motivated, because things will get mundane, right? So that's a big ask in a leadership position, to keep the team motivated, push them forward, and so on. So you have to be taking the charge to be cognizant of changes around you and see what you can apply, right? And today, everybody is talking about the AI buzzword, right? As much as a buzzword it is an excellent opportunity to throw challenges and keep the inspiration levels higher. So you as a leader yourself have to train. That's the first thing to do. Set examples, share, probably working prototypes. So if you put yourself in that sort of a mindset that exploration is key, not only to make yourself happy, but also to lead a team, it really will rub on everybody in your team, right? So that's the approach that I take. I try to figure out what makes sense to the business. Sometimes it may not make sense to the business, but it might help you in keeping the team interested in exploring something. So it's not about every time being in the favor of business, right? It is about keeping the team bonded. It's about creating that culture of innovation. So somebody has to feel proud about cracking a problem or implementing something which has not got too many references. So if you start feeding those ideas into the team, it is something that people will always look up to you for, right? That's what I've seen and I've experienced, and my leadership had done that to me, right? In terms of showing me a way forward, inspiring me to go and do stuff which is not within the conventional realm of what is expected out of you. So in recent days, AI has been giving us a lot more opportunity to do that. Even in the previous companies, right? We didn't have a need, we didn't have the budget, but that was secondary. It was the constant need to say, if the time is right, are we prepared, right? So that's the challenge we keep posing to people and say, you don't have to do stuff that's going to go out as a next release, in the product, but you need to be aware that when the time comes, you're not starting then, right? That is the crux of how you approach these problems. And there is enough in the internet, enough in LinkedIn, enough on blogs to go find out that you want to do. Every day that you or your competitor keeps you busy with what's coming next, right? So identify some of them which could be relevant, could be very generic like AI. Throw them to the team. If you have time to prototype it, it's even more exciting because you yourself can relish and realize the potential. I've had some opportunities to do that, so it gives me a lot of confidence that even if somebody is struggling, I can mentor them. So that's the only way to lead, right? You have to keep business away, because first the team has to be inspired, and then along the way there are ideas that will help both the team and the business together, and that sometimes you will also deploy them in the product, right? So if you start with the product and then try to work back, may happen, may not happen. But the essence of trying to do this is to keep the team together, team to get inspired and so on, right? I think that's what you're asking it. So that is what I practice, and it's been working for me.
So what happens if the business or the business guys or the stakeholders are not in with your ideas? Because suppose whatever you're doing is not working out, and for them it's becoming a pain. How do you handle those, or how do you navigate in those situations?
Correct. So when you look at what business needs, right? We don't have to push it to a point where only when you see the outcome you realize that it's not aligned, right? I mean, that's not good product management at all. So what typically happens is, I'll give you an example, right? So in my last company, there was a need for us to reduce the ongoing support costs. Now, if you look at what the cost was attributed to, so we were, just to give you a background, we were in the business of manufacturing and selling ultrasonic water meters. So a completely hands-free device that would send the data to your mobile app, and you can get to know your consumption, your billing, if there are leakage alerts and so on, right? But when people transition to something as new as this, where earlier people used to take readings in their house and get the bills generated to something that they are going to vet out, they're always going to be a little wary of what the numbers are on their mobile app. Will they trust you, not trust you? Do they think that the water is actually not what they used? So there's always a constant need for them to check back with us to say, can you come and see if the meter is working correctly, right? There's no way for them to test it. So there was this constant need for people to for us to send people, the support engineers to their house and prove to them that it's calibrated, and catch water in front of them and then show that the app readings are corresponding to the consumption and so on. But that's not scalable for a small business. So when you look at how to answer somebody's question, right, you can look at building something like AI, which will go in and say, this is what you use, this is how you did it. You can provide a lot of answers there, but that's a lot of investment, right? Or you could think of a simple guided way for them to use the app and realize the same answers and benefits of that a person that comes into their house and does it for them, right? So there were two schools of thoughts on how you can do it. Now, when we have to look at what to deploy, you typically go through this, matrix of priorities and how you do this, right? So these are the areas where you need to focus as a product manager, so that you don't get to the point where business finally says this is not right. So you go through a prioritization matrix to say, what's the cost, right? What's the gut feeling of this? As I said, everything is a hypothesis. We don't know whether it will work or not, but then you need to go through a structured way to arrive at something so that you align at a higher confidence level that this is worth investing now, and maybe this is too early to invest. So when we did this level of an evaluation, we found that creating a simple workflow in the mobile app that tells people very straightforward instructions. You want to check whether the meters are working, close all your tabs, right? Go to a particular tab that you want to check, right? Have a 2-liter bottle in your hand. Open the tab and close the tab, right? So very simple instructions, but that was what an engineer who walks into the house or a support engineer would do. So we have to break down the problem and say, we don't probably need AI. We don't need something to, as sophisticated as AI or something to talk to them and give them answers right now. But what if you just give them a simple guided experience, right? So this worked for us because people had to only look at 2-3 screens, and it all boiled down to correctly orchestrating the test. Otherwise, they would have somebody else in their house opening the tap somewhere, and then they're testing here, and then they find that they only got 2 liters, but then it's showing 8 liters because somebody else is using the bathroom, right? So making that as a simple screen and navigating them through a controlled environment made us realize that people can, without us spending expensive workforce, understand that things are working fine, right? So if we had gone the other way, then we'd have probably landed here, right? Trying to answer the management why we invested lots of money and time in building AI. So it's not always that it happens, but this is a journey that somebody would take in order to vet out what is the problem, what are the options, then go through a structured evaluation of investments and costs, and then look at the prioritization. So there's something called as the confidence factor, right? Is it why are you confident? Is it because there is already a parallel solution in the market? Are you confident because this is what the customer asks you to build and you know it will work? Or have you already prototyped and got a feedback? So when you get into product management, there are various ways you can evaluate certain things, and then you subject all these options through them to come up with a much more low risk and high return sort of a option. Hopefully that will get to a point where, and your management and your board is pretty much involved through the way, right? You have to put these across to them to say this is the analysis post which we're going with this route, and this is the investment to make. So that's where a product manager has to look at a lot of frameworks and ensure that you get a sign off based on some credible inputs that you've built as a use case to say why you're doing something versus not doing something. If you skip that, or if you don't do that, you might end up in situations where you will be answerable to having invested something which is not going anywhere.
I think that's great. I think these can turn into a good opportunities as well. Like you said, develop an app where people can themselves check how much water was spent in your example. So it became an opportunity for your team to develop something and put it out. It became a problem, and then you converted that into an opportunity. I think that's a that's a great way to.
I'll also add something to that. So when you put out such a solution to, let's say, a 500 apartment building, it's a lot of friction, right? People are not used to checking water on their apps, and you can't onboard 500 families together. But with this sort of a small guided experience, you could make it as a onboarding stage where you can say, let people check and sign off. And then, you don't have to keep battling this constant trust issue again with them, right?
Yeah.
If people are just only 5 families sign off and then they say they don't want to, they're okay with the solution. During the journey, the remaining, 495 families will come along the way and say, oh, we don't know how it works, it doesn't. But we didn't have those screens at that point in time. But now when we started building this to solve one problem, we were also able to position the same in the onboarding phase. So whenever a new society comes up, we'll say, ask them to just use these 3 screens, and then the confidence, the trust gets built up. So as you said, we could repurpose the same thing to try and solve other problems as well.
So it's like converting them into opportunities is your way out. At least that's a good way out, I feel.
Yeah, sometimes they do lend themselves to, if you think a little bit, you might find other places that you can leverage, what you think as solving something else.
So we spoke about leadership qualities, skills. Now I really wanted to talk about how do you conduct as a product manager in market research, and how do you get those insights to evolve your product?
Okay. So when it comes to market research, the main avenue that I've been exploiting is user interviews, right? Getting access to people who use existing products. Those would potentially be our customers and use the way, our products will work and so on. So I can speak a little bit about that. Of course, apart from this, you have your conventional way of searching for information on the web and finding out competitive data, other examples and so on. But I'll focus more on something which is more, a tested methodology. So when you do user interviews, you tend to capture the essence of how people, like to use the products, understand what they do today. So it is not tailored to ask questions to answer, to get answers that you need in building your product. It is to understand what they do today, and then shape up your product to try and make it much more better experience, right? Because if they are not coming in with an idea of giving an answer to how your product should work, nobody has that answer, right? It has to be evolved. So one of the products that I built, which was an online radiology, a marketplace for online radiology, we did have a bunch of challenges when onboarding radiologists. This is specific to the United States. Therefore, there are a lot of laws and there are a lot of conditions that need to be met in order for somebody to be able to do a read for you based on your studies and your images and so on. So when we spoke to radiologists, And we also spoke to the other side of the marketplace, which are the imaging centers who send you cases. We got to know that the space itself is a fairly, I wouldn't say it's a very organized space for information. It is not like, you have services that will enable you to get the credentials of a radiologist in one shot, right? You have to go search for bits of information. So that user study was very useful because typically a product manager or any person in the technology space will start with the idea of automation, right? Hey, how do I, on click of a button, get the data from all the sources, create his profile, onboard him quickly? Yes, that's the ideal way you want to go. But the reality is that that data may not exist, and even if it exists, you don't have APIs to go connect it, right? These could be legacy systems. They could be more controlled information that is not available. Even if you have credentials, it's not easy to call them via an API and so on. So the reality of such a user study made it clear to us that let's not waste time trying to build an automation that doesn't exist. Rather, you go with the hybrid mode of automating what you can. And then it also helped us to open out something that we called as the concierge service. So there is always a personal touch that is required when you collect information, right? You're collecting sensitive information from radiologists to onboard them, and they trust a person compared to a computer, right? Giving all the details. So that's the power of such market research, because you tend to make calls that initially will sort of invalidate what your original thought process was. Let's automate it. Let's make it the fastest onboarding. That's not reality. So this is the biggest takeaway for me, where market research shapes what would be an acceptable level of performance in your system in terms of use cases like onboarding and so on. That's reality. So market research helps you to build this reality, and in our case, that concierge service was a very successful one because people were able to get the comfort of somebody at the other end of the line, walking them through the onboarding process, setting them up quickly, and with the assurances of being very confidential and so on, rather than just putting their social security number on some field in the form, right? So that way, understanding your customer, how they do things today, will make you build something which is slightly different than what you started off with, right? So that's definitely an important part. And if you're blessed with such access, make the full use of trying to understand this, and then you figure out solutions. Don't go with the intention of validating your approach. Go with the intention of understanding what they do today, and then come back. You might have a much better way of actually implementing the same thing.
I think this is very powerful, at least for me. The example which you gave, having a concierge service, gives a personalized touch to a user actually, and gives the confidence to get started and onboard, rather than just filling a form. It really gives the personalized touch and confidence, especially when we are dealing with a little sensitive things. But then nowadays, I would prefer to put my social service number on my own rather than discussing. What is your take on that?
Yeah, and there is just an example, right? In terms of somebody needs to know what is the purpose behind this, right? So you may not give your SSN directly, but then it might come as a part of, let's say, your credentialing certificate or some other information. So the idea is the purpose behind it. Second, this is a volume of data that needs to be fed if you need to onboard a radiologist. Nobody's got the time and patience to sit and do that on the computer. Right?
Okay.
If you go wrong, they don't want to repeat the process. That's the amount of data that needs to be validated before we onboard you as a person who can, you're going to give something which is very crucial to somebody's life, right, in terms of a radiology read. So there's a lot of host of information you need to collect. And that's better done by an organization with some, this sort of a concierge service who helps you go through that process. You collect bits of information from various places. Sensitive information you might want to, enter yourself. Other information you'll have, sometimes people even, mail copies of the certificates and we need to attach them. So the whole idea was you build this practice around a hybrid mode. Try to have as low friction as possible, asking them to do stuff themselves. you take the initial, heavyweight stuff and then onboard it. But over a period of time, what happened is we used to build this thing called Rat Passport. So the whole thing when we set out was there is absence of information. There is no single source of truth. But I think maybe today the company could become a single source of truth, right? So we might again subject to other conditions of illegality and stuff. Technically, we have information, and if it can be consumed with the right sources, then we have built what was not there when we started this thing, right? So that's how this whole stuff has evolved. And College itself could also be like a monetized service.
Yeah.
So the benefits of doing this user interviews helps you shape your approach in how you want to build the product out. So and then that manifests in multiple ways. It could be new business opportunities, it could be a monetizable service, and so on.
I think that's amazing. I think that's really great, and especially the market research thing, where you said you can do your conventional internet research, and then that is one part. But then if you get opportunity to this user interviews, which is really more getting into depth and understanding
Right.
the user journey, I think that's wonderful. Next, what I want to ask is, like, I want to wrap it up, but how I want to wrap it up is, if somebody is looking to get into product management, what should he be prepared for interview at a high level, and what kind of mindset he should be prepared to get into this field or this role?
Okay. So this sort of ties back to my earlier inputs, right? So the mindset has to be one of being able to wear multiple hats, because you will work with a wide array of teams, a wide array of responsibilities. Ability to keep learning constantly, because each team will challenge you in different respects, like design, implementation, analytics, and so on. So that's I think that's what you should be made of in order to take this role, right? And in order to appear for interviews, of course, there are a lot of resources on the internet, and especially YouTube, that you can go find when you type for product management interviews. But you will typically find areas around something called product sense, which talks about um, how a product is expected to be positioned, right? What would you, as a product manager, do to implement a feature? So this area of product sense is vast, and the way to typically enable yourself is to do a lot of practice. So I think there are a lot of resources if you search for product sense. The other thing is product analytics. Typically, this would entail understanding what would you do in order to understand what's gone wrong. How would you assess based on analytical feedbacks that you get? How are you? What's your hypothesis in why something went wrong? And so those are typical things which will put you in a very practical situation, and people will expect that you have a flair in approaching these things in a structured manner. So structure is very, very important here, right? So you don't blurt out answers. You don't come to a conclusion that this is probably why it could have gone wrong. That's not what they're looking at. As I said, the entire thing has to start with a hypothesis. So you try to break the problem down, put your hypothesis forward, and then you find supportive arguments to say why you would be swayed in one direction rather than the other, and so on. So if you have a structured and an organized way to approach a product sense or a product analytic question, then you stand a good chance in getting through, because what they're actually looking for is not for the answer, because the answer is never going to be certain, right? But can you deconstruct the challenge in front of you and approach it in an organized manner? So that's very, very key, right? So this is one part of typical product management interviews that interviews focus on. Apart from it, there are materials that you would also need to know about how you run products, sprints. Are you a person who understands user journeys? can you talk in that language of product, right? How do you translate a user's requirement into a visual representation? Are you a person who's capable of translating the requirements into a visual form? And then from there, see, if you have a user journey, essentially, let's say it's a mobile app or a website, right? Think of it as a starting point where your requirement is very clearly articulated as a set of use cases, right? I can do this, 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 and this, and therefore my product suffices the need of the user. Once that is clear, then logically you're going to implement it with a front end and a back end, right? So the front end is going to be driven by design, then your UX, your UI and UX come there. But once you have that presentation layer clear in your mind, you're going to start realizing what should I build in the back end in order to bring this data, right, or accept requests from the front end. And that's where it gets to start triggering your technology, understanding, right? So the backend will then start decomposing itself into application play and infrastructure play, right? So when you talk about application, what are you going to build? Are you going to build different subsystems like notification systems, authorization systems, logging? So you start thinking at an application level, right? Stuff it's written in code. And then the second part is your infrastructure. How am I going to run this application? Is it going to be serverless? I'm going to use queues. Is throughput the main consideration, or is it data volume? Is it for real time? Is it for batch? So you can really pin the entire flow from a requirement till visualizing even the infrastructure, right? So that is the kind of person you should be. You should be able to correlate stuff and at a very high level, right? Then you're able to present this to different teams. You can talk to a design team and say what these 5 use cases are. You'll be able to validate the UI designs, high fidelity, low fidelity design, and say, okay, the user interactions are correct. You can talk to the engineering team to say that, hey, these are all functional requirements. You've got 5 screens and this is what I want you to do. And you're also able to capture non-functional requirements like, I need this to scale, right? Therefore, don't run this on VMs. I want you to run it on a Kubernetes cluster, or let's try and make this serverless, ensure that we have a data lake, because over a period of time a lot of data sources are going to come in, and then I need to archive data because I have regulatory requirements. So you start expanding your horizon of what entails for the system to be built, right? So if you have a aspiration and a liking for getting this sort of things done, you don't have to go deep into every vertical. You've got teams for that. But if you prepare yourself as a person who can think at this level and essentially move every bit forward, then you're definitely made up for this. And you should be able to articulate this, interest, thought process in your interviews. And, obviously it means that you're structured, you're thinking through it. You may not know what those 5 use cases are, but you have a clear blueprint. And then you can, talk details and get the necessary things moving forward, right? So that's the profile of a person who will really excel being a product manager, because he can think it from a system point of view.
That's that's amazing. I think you have nailed it. One question, just that you said in detail on how you should be prepared. One question lingered in my mind was, should a product manager get involved in system design or system architecture or something like that? How do you think that process?
Well, if you can, then it's always great, because you may have opportunities to leverage that knowledge to help your product go through. But it's up to you. I mean,
No, I think he should get. So, but I'm asking you.
To me, if you're working in a large enterprise, right, you have enough on your plate that even if you know about the design, there's going to be an engineering team that's going to be working on it. But you're always free to do your inputs there. But if you work like a startup, which is most of the environments that I've done, as I said, this job is, I look at it as an intersection of product and engineering, right? So when I wear my engineering hat, it helps me to come up with maybe some red flags, which I can tell the client upfront that, for the first pilot or the MVP, this is what we can do, because it's going to cost you so much, or the infrastructure is not available right now, or for this phase of the project, this is what we can do. So that articulation definitely is a lot easier if you understand the nuts and bolts of infrastructure and design, right? Again, from a coding point of view, it really helps you to start at the right point, rather than just leaving it to somebody in a startup and assuming that they'll get it right. So your environment really matters. In a startup, there is not much of option. You wear both the hats. That's what I used to do. I had to do both. And for me, I am positioned in a better way because my background is technology. So when I talk to clients, as I said, this mental picture of what will be the product and the architecture to support starts evolving, right? So that's always useful when you want to, when you have a smaller task force and you want to, get things done faster. If you're a larger organization, it can help you understand it, but you may not have your your way in trying to get those implemented. It's always an advantage. I mean, I've seen product managers who are very good in design, right? So they come up with, so you leverage your skill at various phases. People are great in analytics, but that's only a starting point, right? But once you come in, you will have to develop that, a skill set in each of these phases. Otherwise, it's very hard to run a program without, being very confident that it's doing what it has to do in each of these stages. So that's my take on it.
Awesome. One thing I just want to bring it out was you said about few resources like product sense and stuff like that. Could you provide us with those materials so that I can attach in my YouTube description? And
Sure.
I think that can be helpful.
Absolutely.
Whoever is watching this and getting into this.
Definitely, yeah. I'll provide some resources. You can add it here. And these have been guiding paths for many people who have transitioned to this role. I'd be more than happy to share what I've been following as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. If you have any questions for me, do shout out.
I don't have questions. I just have a lot of admiration for giving people like us this platform to share, and more importantly, you seem to be a pulse of today's engineers and programmers, and many people lack exactly this, right, which is direction. So I think the purpose of this Code Brew Lounge in trying to give them direction is really much appreciated. And I think we should increase the velocity and multiply the effect of what you're trying to do to this community. And I'm sure they'll have much more pointers to do what they want by means of channels like this. So thank you for the opportunity, and just keep going.
Thank you for giving us this chance to brew amazing conversation with you. And it's been great for me to learn on how a product manager, on how I can at least think myself to get evolved as a product manager. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Kamlesh.